18 live, 18 live, and smash.
This video is going to be a complete beginner's walkthrough of DaVinci Resolve. I've simplified it as much as possible and we're just going to have fun. We're going back a few years to a video that I made with then called Seth King, now called Alessandro Frasali. Before we make it any further, quickly minimize this video and get your download starting. These project files are going to be required to follow the tutorial, so wait until they finish downloading and then resume this video. But with the magic you're about to unlock through editing, we can make that finish immediately. Jump over to your downloads folder and extract the zips. This is as simple as double clicking on them and opening them up. This will decompress them from our download format to files we can actually use. Once you've extracted those zip files and you have the uncompressed media, you can delete the zip files. We're not going to need them anymore. It's then best practice to create a project folder where you're managing all your media. This is something that we've covered throughout Creative Shortcut, so I just assume that you're sorted out for this by now. I personally am going to throw this in my local projects drive. That's on the SSD on my laptop, which is extremely fast, which, as you know from the digital efficiency section, is great for editing. Then open up DaVinci Resolve and go to your project database. I'm going to do this in Learning to DVR, and the next step is to go ahead and grab the .drp file that we extracted and put in our project folder location. The .drp file is your DaVinci Resolve project file that we're going to load in, that has some examples, has things a little bit set up for you already for your first edit. If you click and drag this into your database, it will load it up as if you made the project yourself. You can now see that you have opened up a project and there's something going on, but we're missing our media. It says media offline. Go to your master, right click, relink clips for selected bin, and then go to the project location where you have your media. For me, that is my local projects and CS Beginner's Guide to DaVinci Resolve. Click the overall main folder, not an individual folder inside, and then press open. If you do happen to mess up your links, like it will be for you right now, click on Comprehensive Search. DaVinci Resolve will do its magic and it will fix the problem that I have effectively created. Before we get any further, I want to make sure that we're all in the same place. Along the bottom of DaVinci Resolve, you're going to see some different tabs. Each of these are different workspaces to enable you to easily do specific parts of the editing workflow. On the far left, we have Media. This is for importing and managing all your videos or your assets that you're going to be working with. Then next along to the right we have Cut. This is designed for speed cutting your work with a magnetic timeline, which automatically closes gaps and does some other clever things to assist you when you're just trying to flesh out an initial edit. Then we have the Edit tab. This is where I am now. This is where we're going to be spending the majority of the time in this tutorial, so jump over to that. Next we have Fusion. This is where you can do some really cool stuff. It's where we do motion graphics, but it's like a whole other program built into DaVinci Resolve, so do not worry about it yet. Then we have our color tab. This is where we're going to do all our color grading, make our videos stand out and really step it up to the next stage. This is a massive part of DaVinci Resolve, majoritively what sets it apart from other editing programs. Then we have Fairlight, which is where you can do lots of things with your audio. And finally, we have the Deliver page, where you render and turn your project, your work that you've done, into a video that can actually be uploaded and played and watched by all the people that are going to watch your content. But like I said, we're keeping this nice and simple, so head over to the Edit tab where we're going to get started. Over on the left, we have all the files that we're working with. You should be able to see Master, but you might not have Power Bins and Smart Bins open. Go to the three dots here and make sure that Show Smart Bins and Show Power Bins is enabled. These are great because what they enable us to do is some really clever things. Your master files are all the files that are dedicated to this project. They don't show up anywhere else. They will only be organized in this project that we're working on. Your Power Bins open in every single project, so they're really powerful to start building up useful generic assets that you're going to access lots. But it's things like your sound effects, maybe some visual effects, graphics that you use for your company or a company that you do lots with, that kind of stuff. Then we have Smart Bins. These enable us to put in certain rules so that they can sort our media for us. They can do some really cool things such as analyzing all your videos and putting metadata on them to sort them into people, like specific faces, or types of scene or types of shot, all that kind of stuff. One that we'll make very quickly is called timelines. This is just so we can find any of the timelines we make. Let's do this quickly now, and then I'll break down what timelines are. If you drag your smart bins up so you have a little bit of space at the bottom, right click and add smart bin, you can then make your timeline smart bin. Change the name to timeline, drop down so that you are on media properties, drop down so you are on timeline is enabled. If you press create, it will then create a new folder in your smart bin that shows you all your timelines regardless of where they are in your project. This is super useful, which you'll find out as you make bigger projects. I'm going to remove this because I already have it. Clicking over on your master project, you can find all the files that we're going to be working on. We have the creative shortcut light leaks, which I made very quickly for this project, which you can use however you want on whatever project for commercial use. I don't care, it's yours. Then we have your project files. You don't have permission to use these commercially. They are for your learning, and they are also lower res files. They're in H.265, so you can download them nice and easily, but they are still very acceptable quality for learning, for doing a bit of color grading in, lots of fun stuff. These clips have also been trimmed, so they are almost the right length. There's enough space for you to play with them, but it's just exactly what you need. Then we have a timelines folder I've created for you. This has two timelines at two different stages of the project. The base timeline is just all the media on your timeline with everything in the right place. So once you've learned how to do it, you don't have to sit through and do each one. And then we have our finished timeline, so that as you're making your timeline, if you want to check what I've done, you can just go straight over to it on your timeline and look at the exact settings that I've done. Your timeline is down here. If you can't see multiple tabs like I have here, I highly recommend turning it on. If you click on this button here and make sure that your stack timelines is on, then you can open that up and start having tabs where you can add and drop down to add all your different timelines. But we've already got all ours open. You can see our base timeline and our finished timeline. With all that covered, it's time for you to build your own timeline and start actually using DaVinci Resolve. Head over to the timeline folder and then right click in any empty space. You should be able to go to timeline and create new timeline. Just to cover the settings, I am going to quickly untick project settings, which unlocks all the possible settings for our timeline, and walk you through them quickly. Over in general, the only thing that's of interest is naming our timeline. You always want to name things so that you can actually find them, or if you expand into a greater team or have to come back and look at them, people just know what's going on without having to kind of like work out what this mess is that is your project. For the sake of this video, let's call this the tutorial timeline. Next over, we have format. There's a few things worth noting here. The first is the timeline resolution. You can have this lower than your final resolution that you're going to output your project at, but when it comes to rendering, make sure you come back and update this. For me personally, I often use a 2:1 aspect ratio. In 1080p, that's 1920 by 960, and in 4K, that's 3840 by 1920. But for the sake of not overcomplicating this, let's just drop down to 4K as standard, which is 3840 by 2160 Ultra HD. If you were to be making vertical videos, then you would want to make sure that that's selected and probably be using a 1080p timeline, but for now, let's leave that 4K wide. Making our way down, we have our timeline frame rate. It's really important that you match your base frame rate of the majority of your footage here with your timeline settings. If you filmed in 25 FPS, you want this to be 25. 30, then this should be 30. Whatever frame rate the majority of your footage is at, that's what you want your timeline base frame rate to be. Otherwise, your video will not look smooth when it's rendered, or might have sort of glitches in it from the computer guessing where frames should be and what they should look like. In the case of this project, the footage was filmed over in Asia in a country that had 60 Hz electricity, meaning that we are on the NTSC format, filming at 23.97 FPS. This right here is your monitor. It is effectively the little window that you're watching what you've put on your timeline as you play over it. There really aren't very many downsides to having your video format for your monitor resolution lower than your timeline. Most of the time you're going to be watching this in a tiny window anyway, so it just means that your computer doesn't have to work quite as hard whilst you're editing, which means your timeline is going to run smoother. So there's nothing that we really need to change here. That's the same case for output. We're not going to be messing with this. Over in the color tab, tab, there's only one thing you need to make sure you have right. The reason that Rec 709-8 is great for beginners is that platforms like YouTube that you're going to be uploading your video content to, your final renders to, output all their stuff in this same format. What this means is that when you're looking at your timeline, when you're color grading your footage, it's going to look exactly the same as how it's going to look when it ends up on places like YouTube, when they re-render your video into all the different resolutions and the much more compact codecs that they actually stream their videos to all the viewers in, which is great because there's nothing more frustrating than messing something up here, making it all look exactly how you want, rendering it out, it looking great, and then you put it up online and it looks completely different to how you initially had it on your computer the whole time. But with all those covered, we can now press create and start our project. Heading up to our project files, we can have a look at all the different videos that we have available. At the bottom, we have the template that you're going to follow. You can click and drag that onto your timeline. Here you can see we've generated a video layer and an audio layer. As we drag more things on, we generate more layers, and whatever is at the highest layer is the video that you actually see on your timeline. So you can see we have him picking up the phone here, but if I were to delete this by selecting and pressing backspace, then you can see that we've gone back down to our layer 1. I'm going to mute my timeline so that as I move around it doesn't overwhelm my voice and get really irritating. The first step that you want is to head over to the beginning and identify the clip that we've got at the beginning here for this music video. You can see that it's this one here where he is sat on the wall, very upset and about to throw his phone. Clicking and dragging this, you can bring it down to your timeline. I've given you a little bit of extra space either side of the actual clips that we have on our timeline so that you can click and adjust them like this. Grabbing the end of any clip will allow you to adjust it to whatever length you want at the beginning or the end. We can then click and drag to reposition it, and we can move it over onto our timeline where we want it. We need to line this up with the clip underneath. Because this is a music video, it's very important that the mouth is in time with the song, otherwise it throws everything off and it feels very weird to watch. A little trick that we can do, which help you understand layers a little bit better, is if you make sure that you have your inspector tab open up here top right, and then you're on your video, you can go through all your transform options and lots of other ways of manipulating your video. We want composite, which allows us to play with our opacity. I'm going to click and drag this down so that I can see the difference between the layer on top and the layer underneath. We've effectively made this layer 42.75% transparent. If I have that clip selected on my timeline and I press disable, which is D on your keyboard, you can see the difference between the position of the one underneath that's in the correct place and the one above, which is in the right place. Now all we have to do is click and drag until we find ourselves in the right place, perhaps making some more space over on the left so we can go further left. As soon as it all locks in and you don't see any of that ghosting, you know that you have put this in the right place. We can then also click and drag on the end here and we can see when it moves on to the next frame, and that's going to help us position it perfectly. If you want, you can go through and do this for the rest of the clips. However, you're fully welcome to jump across to the base timeline where I've already done this process, so that rather than spending all the time doing, you can just learn. There are a couple of ways that we can manipulate tracks and layers that you're going to need to know. These are all settings here, and you can simply just press on them and see what they do. In this case, we have some audio coming through from our video clips, you can see attached to here, that we don't actually want to be showing, or at least heard in our video. So what we can do is we can just mute these two tracks, and that means that only our audio from our actual music video is going to play. If we wanted, we could also do this to whole video tracks. This is useful. The reason for this is that we are going to reposition our clips now, and there's something we can do that's going to help us do this. Down here we have all our effects that we have access to in DaVinci Resolve. If you can't see this, make sure you press the effects tab up here on the left. Then search for adjustment layer, making sure that you are on the toolbox. You can now click and drag this to your timeline and stretch it out to be the whole length of the video, up on your track 4, which should be far out the way of everything underneath. We're then going to apply another effect called grid. If you scroll down to open FX, that will pop up there. We can bring this down to 3x3, and that's going to give us a nice graph for rule of thirds so that we can position everything and keep things in line with the clip that comes after them. With this up here on the adjustment clip, it's going to show over all our video frames, which is really useful, and when we're done with it we can turn it off by disabling that track. But for now we want it on, so we're going to turn it on. There's another useful thing we can do. If you remember our power bins from earlier where I said it will be available across all your projects, this adjustment clip, rule of thirds, is something that you're going to use a lot on most of your projects. If you click and drag this in, you can save it. You can then rename it to rule of thirds, and then whenever you have a project in the future, you can simply click and drag this onto your timeline and it's just going to be ready to go with the grid set up as it needs to be. Clicking on it and then pressing backspace to delete. Pressing Option or Alt on Windows and scrolling on our mouse or our trackpad is going to enable us to zoom in and out of our timeline, which makes it easier to see what's going on. We can now press spacebar and play to see all of the clips that we have on our timeline and how we might potentially want to modify them. There's actually a little bit of shake in some of these because I was using a variable lens on a stabilizer. When you're running gun, you have to make do with what you've got, but we can very easily remove the judders that have been caused by the barrel being at different positions, which has shifted the weight and caused our stabilizer to not be perfect. And that's by highlighting all the clips that are on our timeline here, making sure we're in Inspector, Video, scrolling down to Stabilization and clicking it to make sure it's open. On Mode drop down you have three options. The one at the top is the most intense, the one at the bottom is least intense. For the purposes of this video we're just going to go for translation. We're going to knock the strength back down to about 0.4 and we're going to drop the cropping ratio down to 0.25. We're then going to press stabilize, and because we have all our clips selected, it is going to go through and apply those settings to all our clips. The reason we want to do this is it's actually going to punch in a little bit on some of the clips where it needs to stabilize them, and therefore it's going to reframe how our image looks, so we want to do it before we actually rearrange our footage positioning. When reframing clips, your goal is to make sure that when the clip moves to a different take, a different angle, a different location, the person still stays roughly in the same place, and that's just so it's not disorientating to watch as it cuts and suddenly you're looking to a different part of the screen to find out where the subject that you're watching is. I'm going to jump over to 19 seconds on the timeline, and you can see here that we have a little bit of jump of location of the head. At the end of the previous clip we are heading over towards the top right line of thirds, and then we sort of start much closer down to the bottom left line of thirds. We want these to be about the same. I'm going to select the clip over to the right hand side, and then I am going to make sure that I'm in Inspector, Video, Transform, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit just so that we can start bringing him over towards the clip on the left. What I'm also going to do is go up to my video transitions, get rid of my previous search, and just drag a cross dissolve into the middle. What this is going to allow me to do is see a ghost of the previous image so that I can line it up nicely. By changing our X positioning, we can move left and right. By changing our Y position, we can move up and down. And our goal really is to get the eyes at approximately the same level and location, but the less ghosting, the better our cut. That looks about right. I'm now going to select that cross dissolve we placed by clicking on it and then pressing backspace to delete. You can now see that when we move across, the head positioning is very similar. Something that you really need to look out for when you are doing transform and you are changing how your video looks is that if we disable this video track, and let's say I hadn't zoomed in, and I'm also going to disable the layer underneath so it's very clear. If I hover over the video of my timeline and then pinch and zoom on my trackpad, I can actually see up close that I've moved the image out of the way of effectively the frame that it's sat in. So this is why we scale in a little bit, because it stretches our image out and gives us some space to work with, and it's why it's nice to film in 4K, because we can go all the way up to a 2x zoom and our image is still 1080p. I'm just going to undo that all quickly so that we can get back to where we were in a nice finished position, and then I'm going to go back over here and just quickly drop down the scaling option here and press fit, which is going to bring it back to the position that's nice and I can see everything. What we're then going to do is add some keyframes. Keyframes are really cool, but what they basically do is enable you to save a location, go somewhere else on the clip, and generate a new location that it will slowly move towards that keyframe in between those two keyframes. Again, we're going to do a little cross dissolve, and we're going to punch stretch in very slightly so that we come to the same size as his face is in the next shot, and we're going to again try our best to position it so it's not too far off what we've been looking at. With that done, I'm going to press delete on that crossfade, and now it will lean much nicer into that next clip. Just a quick note, there's lots of fun things that you can do up in the Inspector Video tab. It's not just limited to zooming and moving around, but all the options that are here are fairly obvious. They're not difficult to just have a play and see what they do and get used to playing with them. You can do things like cropping your video so that you can stack lots into the same layer, and there's some nice little things like dynamic zoom, which will put an automatic slow zoom in. But effectively just have a play here, see what they do, and you're just going to learn all these little intricate things that you can do with a video as you make progress and get better. But ultimately, experience is just going to take time. You can't have knowledge in something that you've not done. So quickly pause this video, go down onto your timeline and play with all those options in your video inspector and set things up how you want them to be. It's your creative outlet, have fun. If you want to see what I personally did, remember you can jump across to the finished timeline and click on them and look at all the settings that have been applied at any stage of this video. Some have been left alone, some of them have had things happen to them. With all our positioning, moving stuff around done, we no longer need this grid, and it's actually in the way of the next thing that we're going to have some fun with. It's time to do some color grading. We're going to have a little bit of fun. If you disable your video layer 2, you will see that there's a little bit of our video that Seth, or Alessandro now, has made black and white. To do this, we're going to re-enable that layer 2 track and head over to the color tab, which is down here at the bottom. What this is going to enable us to do is look at all the tools that are available for color grading. This is like a whole nother page, and there's so much to it, but we're going to keep it really simple. Remember, this is just a beginner's tutorial. This is what you would apply all the settings to, and you can have lots of them and they can stack up in different ways, but we're just going to leave it as a single node, so it's almost like you're not even using nodes. All our settings will apply to this, and it will go from the beginning to the end, and you don't really need to know any more at this point. Down on the bottom right here, you can see there's a graph. There might also be a few other things in places that you don't recognize. For now, just ignore it, keeping it super simple. Go over to your primary color wheels. If you don't have this selected, click on these menus. It's the third one from the right, and if you hover over it, it's called color wheels. Make sure you are on primaries, color wheels, and that you aren't on log here, but you are on this one here. We then have some lovely simple settings. We have your temperature, which will make your image warmer or cooler. Your tint, which will make your image greener or pinker. Your contrast, which will allow you to take away or add more contrast to your image, make it more punchy or make it flatter. Your pivot lets you pivot where the contrast is applied. So let's say I put this up to 1.5. The pivot enables us to change where the contrast is applied. If we go all the way down to 0, it's going to make our image much brighter. And if we go all the way up to 1, it's going to make it much darker. That's something for you to play with, but we will put those back to normal for now. Then we have our lift, our gamma, our gain, and our offset. Now, these funny looking dial things effectively allow you to choose how colors are affected in the image, but we don't need to go into that in this video. Your lift dictates where your darkest part of your image is. If you look at our image up here, you'll see that as I bring this up, the dark parts of our image get brighter. Bring it down, the darker parts of our image get darker. Again, resetting back to 0. Our gamma helps choose where the midtones are. So when we turn this up, you'll see on our graph over here, it kind of shoves our midtones into the highlights, and bring it down brings our midtones into the darkest part of our image. So it kind of shoves around the middle of your image. Then we have your gain. This enables you to change the brightest part of your image. And between the three of these, you are able to pretty much choose how you want your contrast to look. For this video, we're just going to eyeball it. That's not how you'll be doing it in the future, but we're just having fun. You're just getting an idea of how this stuff works at this point. Down on the bottom left here, we have our color boost. Turning this up is going to make your colors get a lot stronger. Turning it down is going to make it a lot flatter. And that's what we want for this video. We want it to be black and white. So turning this down to a very low negative number, maxing out a negative 100, is going to make us black and white, which was the goal. And by playing with the lift, the gamma and the gain, we've got that to a much clearer image. We can see what's going on now. We can actually turn this node off now by clicking on the little 01 number, and we can see our before and our after. That's all we need to do for this tutorial. However, if you want, for a little bit of bonus fun, go through each of these and grade them how you'd like them to look, using those primaries, using the color temperature if you'd like to adjust how warm or cool it is. Basically just play with the dials and start getting familiar with what they do. If you want to get really keen, we can have a little bonus tip, which is to make sure that you have your scopes open and you are on your waveform, and your goal is to make sure that the white parts of your image, the bright parts at the top here, which represent the bright bits here, are just touching the top, and likewise the dark bits at the bottom here are just touching the bottom. You want to avoid doing what's called crushing your image. So if I were to bring my lift all the way down, this aggressively crushed black is where we've gone too deep, and you can see that because if you look at our waveform, we've slammed it onto the bottom. But we can bring that up to a point where our black is just touching 0, and then our blacks are black, but we still have detail in our shadows. You can do the same on your gain. If you go too high, you can slam everything up and overexpose your image. So we bring this down and then back up so it just touches the very top, and therefore we know our whites are white, very black parts of our image are black, but his jacket, which is a dark color, still has detail. If you don't see this little bar here, make sure that you have clips selected, and you can ignore the effects bar over on the side here. When you're content, head back over to the edit tab. Now grab the playhead and have a little click around. You'll see that we go from our colored image to our black and white image to our colored image. But if you disable that layer 2 again, if you grab the playhead and have a little drag around, you'll see that on the points where we go from the black and white to the color and vice versa, we have this kind of light effect coming over the top of our image. This is what's known as a light leak, and I quickly made some for you. If you jump over to your assets over on the far left and click on the royalty-free light leaks, you can use these as you like for whatever reason. I don't care. I made them in about 5 minutes. If you want to make your own, if you put cling film or some kind of semi-translucent material over the front of your lens and make sure that your focus is off in the distance, when you shine a light around the barrel, it's going to cause the cling film to light up and be all bokeh out, and that's how I've basically done this effect. If you go through, there's a few different ones. Choose whichever one looks good. There we go. That's a nice one. I'm going to click and drag that down onto my timeline, and we want it to go over this transition here, and I'm going to turn our layer back on. Now you can see obviously this is a solid video. Currently it just blocks on top, but what we can do is we can go down to the composite, we can change it over to add, and now it's just going to add brightness to the image underneath as opposed to showing the whole of the image. We need to bring the opacity down so it's not too aggressive. And I can already see that this light leak on top that we've added brightness with has added too much brightness. We're a little bit bright on our previous image, and I did abandon it a little bit. So I'm going to jump back over to the color tab. I'm going to make sure that I'm selected on this image here, and I'm going to bring the gamma back down so it's nice and dark, and I'm going to bring the gain down too. Now when that light leak happens, it's not going to blow out our image. I'm also going to put a crossfade on. So if you go over to Toolbox, Video Transitions, go down to Cross Dissolve, and I'm just going to put that, drag it across onto the beginning and the end of the light leak just so it fades in really nicely. Now you can see we have a little light leak. It's a little bit different to the one he had, but you can have a look through or make your own, or it is just your creative impression. Whatever you enjoy is good. He also has one on the exit. There's a little something over the top there. You can see it coming through. So we'll throw another random one on top. There we go. That one will do. And what we can do, if we right click on this one and then press copy, we can go across to this one and we can press paste attributes. If we click video attributes, it will copy all of the video attributes across, and you can see that that effect has come straight onto here. I'm going to re-enable our video track, and you can see that light leak coming across on top. We also need to drag that cross dissolve onto both sides so that we have the same nice soft entry and exit of our effect. With your videos all placed, with any effects that you want placed, text, with all your color grading done, how you'd like it to look, you're starting to end up with a very finished video. Something that will be good for you to do right at the end is to do a few minor things. First of all, because this song is cut randomly in the middle of the music video, so I could find a nice segment for you guys, the music isn't fading out nicely. So we can go over to our audio transitions in effects. Again, make sure this is on if you can't see it, and just put a little crossfade to 0. If we click across and then zoom in, we can click and drag that so that it fades out nice and slowly. We can also go across and pick up a cross dissolve from our effects panel turned on up here with video transitions and cross dissolve, dragging this onto our video clip here and selecting it and dragging it out again allows us to have a nice fade out. You can see that we have revealed the credits from the end of this edit. Now what would be great is to add a little bit of text ourselves. So over on the left here, we're going to do just that. If you go to your effects panel, titles, and then just make sure you've got this basic text and title here, click and drag it onto your timeline, and then click and drag across from the right hand side to make it end with all our video clips. We can now manipulate a title, some text. With the text selected, go to settings, and we can go all the way up and reposition our text with the positioning tools that we have in Transform. And then we can go back to title and we can write tutorial completed by whatever your name is. Nice to meet you. If you highlight a certain part of the clip, you can go down to the size here and you can adjust just that bit. So if you've got a shorter name, you can adjust the size of the tutorial complete and then make your name bigger like this so that it all sort of lines up. And really coming throughout here, you can highlight certain bits, you can change the fonts, whatever you think works well for your video, you can do. It's fairly straightforward, pretty much all the tools you'd expect for any kind of text or document. But with that, we've covered a very good base on editing in DaVinci Resolve. If you jump across the finished timeline, you can look at the difference between mine and yours, see if it brings up some things that you might want to try in terms of changing your grade a little bit, whatever it is. There's only one thing that I've done slightly differently to what I've taught you, which is in the color tab. Once you've finished with your primary color wheels and you've got your image looking how you want, you can tweak it a little bit in curves. So this is a bonus, again, for a bit of fun. If you head over to curves, you can do what's called an S-curve. This allows you to target your contrast. We'll learn a lot more about curves, graphs, color grading in the following section, but if I just quickly go up here and reset this, going left and right at the top here lets us play with our highlights. Going left and right here at the bottom allows us to play with our shadows, the dark bits. In between lets us manipulate how bright our midtones are. A very common approach to here is to do what's called an S-curve. That's where you bring the top part of your midtones up and the bottom part of your midtones down. And what that does is it makes it very nice and detailed and punchy in your midtones without doing what we described earlier, where you crush your shadows or blow out your highlights. But really, this project is all about having fun. It's about getting used to what the tools do, where things are, building up some muscle memory, and just getting some awareness of what this whole new program is, which is going to be really useful for the next module, where I will be taking you through an entire walkthrough of my entire process on a 1 million subscriber video, where you can follow me every step of the way. The last step is to go over to your delivery tab. This is where we would render the video. Again, I will cover this really in depth in the next module, but if you just head over to YouTube, 4K, name your file what you'd like it to be called, make sure your frame rate's right. All of these settings are fairly simple. You really don't need to be messing about here. And because this is a video that we're not going to be putting anywhere, make sure that your upload is turned off. It's going to make things a lot more simple. Add to render queue, render. Now this is going to render wherever the location path is that you've selected, and you're done. You've completed your video. See you soon.